Migrostacja. Nie tylko naukowe rozmowy o migracjach.
In 2024, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Poland's accession to the European Union, and a lot has been said about the benefits of the freedom of movement. But the question is, did all benefit from the freedom of movement equally? My name is Agnieszka Radziwinowiczówna. I'm an assistant professor at the Center of Migration Research, and during this short video, I will answer this question on the basis of the UK case. I've been researching Polish migration to the UK over the last 11 years. And most importantly, in my two previous research projects, I've been looking at deportations from the UK. In my previous research project, BRAT, I was Marii Skłodowska-Curie Fellow at the University of Wolverhampton. Currently, I'm the principal investigator in the UK to Deport research project at the University of Warsaw. The EU Citizens Directive 2004 explains that an EU citizen residing in a different EU member state can be deported on the grounds of public security and public policy. And the longer the residence in the member state, the more serious the grounds for deportation should be. In other words, deportation in the EU guarantees a securitizing role. And it's difficult to deport an EU citizen from another EU member state. In the UK before Brexit and the end of the transition period, EU citizens was regulating deportations. But what was happening? In the run-up to Brexit, the proportion of deported EU citizens among all deported people from the UK was growing. And in 2019, almost half of deportees were EU citizens. Only three nations, Romanians, Polish, and Lithuanians, made up 70% of deported EU citizens. And it wasn't because there were so many Romanians, Poles, and Lithuanians in the UK. In 2019, these three nations made 40% of EU population. So there was clearly an overrepresentation of Central and Eastern Europeans among the EU deportees. In my recently published article in the European Journal of Criminology, I tried to explain the differentiated deportability of Central and Eastern European Union citizens. I have found out that two populations were particularly affected by deportations. The first one were people who had contact with the criminal justice system in the UK, and the second one were rough sleepers. In British English, rough sleeper is a street homeless person. So let's start with people who had contact with the criminal justice system. Over the second decade of the 21st century, the UK removed the minimal sentencing thresholds for considering somebody for deportation. In 2013, the immigration regulations were changed, and EU citizens could be deported on the grounds of public security or public policy, even in the absence of criminal convictions. So, a person, even with minor offense, could be targeted for deportation. Obviously, such a person often could appeal against the deportation order. Deportations were particularly successful in cases of people who didn't understand their situation, who had poor English, and, importantly, who had no legal representation. And here, economic capital was crucial. In the UK, there is no free legal aid in deportation cases. And understanding of the situation and legal support was crucial, importantly because many prisoners were misinformed in prison about their post-deportation rights. Many believed that they would be able to go back to the UK following their deportation, and they realized they had re-entry bars only when they tried to cross the UK border. And what about the street homeless people? In 2016, the UK Home Office changed the guidelines for the caseworkers and defined rough sleeping as an abuse of treaty rights. In 2016 and 2017, the numbers of deported EU citizens started to grow, and so was the proportion of deported Romanians, Poles, and Lithuanians. People were being deported just because they were sleeping on the streets. Some of them worked or studied in the UK. In December 2017, the High Court found this policy unlawful, and the Home Office removed the referrals to rough sleeping from the guidelines. In the following year, in 2018, the number of deported EU citizens fell by 1,000. It doesn't mean, however, that before and after the controversial policy, the rough sleepers were not being deported. They were deported because they didn't work, or they were criminalized for antisocial behavior and deported on the grounds of criminality. For instance, one of the research participants in my research got seriously ill in 2013. The Home Office tried to deport her and she was detained for 6 months. She successfully appealed against her deportation order, but when she was leaving detention in 2013, her passport was confiscated. She didn't have her documents for 4 years, and she couldn't work, and she couldn't travel to Poland. What do EU deportations tell us? First of all, for the UK case, they didn't make the country a safer place. They rather served to return the poorest Europeans to their countries of origin, where they received very little or no support at all. They also prefigured the post-Brexit immigration policies. And here I would like to give 3 examples. The first one is the rough sleeping rule. From 2020, rough sleeping is a base for cancellation of visa. The second one is the importance of criminality. EU citizens and their family members who wished to stay in the UK after Brexit had to apply to the EU settlement scheme. In the application, they had to declare criminal convictions, be it in the UK or overseas. And finally, immigration enforcement statistics. When we look at the numbers of people who are refused entry to the UK, almost half are EU citizens. 60% of EU citizens refused entry to the UK are Romanians and Bulgarians. According to the UK Home Office, there is no national profiling in place. The people who are refused entry are suspected of coming to the UK to work, but they lack visa. For instance, one of research participants told us that he was coming to the UK with 4 pairs of trousers in his backpack. He was refused entry because the border force assumed that he was coming for more than a week to work in the UK. By the way, if you are a EU citizen and you're planning to go to the UK for purpose of travel, you can still go there without any visa. Just remember to take your passport with you, because if you are trying to board the plane with your national identity card, the flight attendant won't let you in. Researching such complex reality requires complex methodology. I have decided to talk about this topic at the end of this video, for those of you who stayed with me until now. Designing this research was complicated for 2 reasons. The first thing is that researching deportation is always difficult because deportees are a hard-to-reach group and there is social stigma related to deportation and the reasons that lead to deportation. Another reason is that this research is on the topic where there is very little official data. The UK Home Office publishes statistical data on the number of enforced removals, but does not speak about the reasons for their deportation. In other words, we know how many Poles or Romanians were removed, but not how many of them were rough sleepers, and how many were targeted on the grounds of criminality. Needless to say, the Home Office does not include misinforming the deportees about the re-entry ban in its official guidelines for staff. My research included law on the books and law in action. On the one hand, I researched EU and UK legal acts, policy papers, and Home Office guidelines. My research of law in action included analysis of secondary data, for instance, the statistics with which I started this talk, or data collected by other researchers. But most importantly, I collected primary data. I interviewed previously detained and deported people, migrants, including wives of deported men, and individuals supporting vulnerable Central and Eastern European nationals in the UK. I also analyzed internet forums and replies to Freedom of Information requests made to the Home Office, Polish consulates, and authorities in Poland. My research was multi-sited. I worked in various places in England and in Poland, which is one of the countries that received the biggest number of deportees from the UK. I used data from different sources in order to compare the perspectives, most crucially the perspectives of the makers of the deportation regime and the people affected by it. Doing research on deportations is ethically challenging. The research process is full of emerging power imbalances between the researcher and the research participants. That is why I have developed the power knowledge approach to researching deportations. I described it in the introduction to the book Research Methods in Deportation, Power Knowledge Approach. I have recently edited the book. It is an epistemological approach insofar as it problematizes the power imbalances emergent in the research process. It invites the researchers to be mindful of our positionality. In other words, the power knowledge approach prioritizes reflexivity. But the power knowledge approach has two elements. The reflexive is the first component. The second one is the proactive one. The researchers should always propose ways to proactively minimize power imbalances in the research process. And I believe that the ethics of care, the ethical cornerstone of the power knowledge approach, may be a useful guideline to do it. We should care for and care about our research participants, but we should do it in a non-patronizing way, acknowledging their agency. The contributors to the book I edited write about the ways they worked towards minimalizing power imbalances. I have divided the book to sections of different stages of the research process. So we have examples of the use of the power knowledge approach from seeking access to the field to the dissemination of the results. If you are interested in the book, the first two chapters are available open access and free to read for all. Please scan this QR code to browse the book.